So the leaders of the G20 member states and EU are once again putting their heads together to map out ways to fix global issues. But that global problem solving is not going to be so easy. Let's talk more about those challenges with Professor Min Jung-hoon. Welcome.
Okay, my pleasure.
So the G20 chair says the declaration is almost ready, but there are concerns that there might not be one at the end. Now, how likely is it that there is not going to be a declaration at the end of the summit?
Well, as you know, the G20 summit this year is being held in New Delhi, India, and it is expected that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is using this their meeting as an opportunity to improve India's presence on the world stage and demonstrate India's role as a bridge connecting the global south and the western developed countries. But regarding the agendas of the summit, I think Ukraine war, climate change, and debt crisis of the low-income countries are likely to be mainly discussed. And as we got the report, these is very complicating and not easy to solve among the member states. So that's the main reason why the media reported that a joint declaration or the joint statement may not be adopted for the first time in the history of the G20 summit. Mm-hmm. I think it's mainly because the member states have different interests on the agendas of the meeting. For example, regarding the Ukraine war, the Western democratic countries have different opinions and ideas from the developing countries, mainly in terms of their relationships with Russia. Mm. And think about using the green economy or the green green economy like that. And for the Western democratic countries, they want to move toward the green economy and try to put more limitations in using fossil fuels at home. But the developing countries have the total different situations at home. They still need to use the fossil fuel to run their economy, and which means that they are ready to move toward the green economy yet. So they got huge opinion gaps between the developed and developed countries. Mm-hmm. So it would not be easy to narrow down such kind of gaps between them. Of course, as you know, they had a similar situation in the G20 summit last year, mm-hmm. but they could manage to narrow down the gaps and could make the final deal. But the situation is getting tougher as time went by, and it's not certain whether they would be able to get the kind of a compromise this time. So we'll see what will happen.
Right. The Ukraine crisis may be the big problem again this year. Now, that's why Indian Prime Minister is making sure that Ukraine crisis doesn't steal the thunder at this year's summit. Now, the question is, why is he trying so hard to shed light on the needs of, you said, the developing countries, the so-called global south?
Well, as I mentioned a moment ago, India is trying to get kind of the golden opportunity through the G20 summit. India want to be a kind of a moderator, connecting the two camps, developing and developed countries, through the G20 summit. Mm-hmm. And as you know, India is one of the big developing countries, and its economy is growing fast. Mm-hmm. And based on the fast-growing economy, India wants to establish itself as a leader of the global south and want to exert its influence as a bridge connecting the two camps. And regarding the Ukraine war, as you know, India has taken the kind of neutral position between Russia and the Ukraine, although U.S. and many other Western democratic countries urged India to take a side with them. Instead, India has maintained its economic relations with Russia and imported huge amounts of oil and natural gas with lower prices. So I think that India's strategic autonomy has provided a useful example for the other developing countries who didn't want to take a side between them. So it is expected that India will make progress in establishing itself as a leader of the global south through the G20 summit this year. That's the main reason why the Prime Minister Modi is working too hard.
Right. Modi will indeed try hard to become the voice of the global south. Now then, I have to ask you, how successfully do you think he'll actually represent their voices?
Well, we need to see actually what will happen, but of course his mothering role is totally based on the national interests. For example, it is reported that Modi is trying to show both Russia and Ukraine's opinions and the opinions and positions about the war in Ukraine in a joint declaration. I'm not sure whether his plan will work at the end, but we need to think about what kind of the helpful roles the President Biden of the United States could do on behalf of India. And basically, I think the President Biden will support India's mothering role and willingly help India emerge as a leader of the global south this time. As you know, U.S. is going through the strategic competition with China, and India is a very important partner for tracking the rise of China.
Right.
So if India emerges as a leader of global south, it would be a very useful channel for U.S. to utilize to communicate with the developing countries and enhance its cooperation with them. So I'm not sure yet, but based on the support of the United States, this G20 summit will provide India with a golden opportunity in becoming the voice of the global south.
Right. It could be a real win-win situation for both the U.S. and India. Now, let's say the worst case scenario is a no joint declaration at the end. And if that actually happens, what will it mean for the G20 or even for the world not to come up with a declaration at the end? Is it just a big blow to Modi?
Well, it could be more serious problems that the world is facing, not just the big blow for the Modi. And basically, I think that if the G20 member state fails to adopt a joint declaration this time, it shows that the current world is polarized too much. And it will be harder for them to make a compromise for the major international issues like climate change and the food security in the coming years. And so the world is facing the very difficult situation, and more precisely, I think the world is in a deadlock in making the cooperation and compromises among the member states. And the G20 summit this year clearly shows how serious it is for the world to take a side over the major issues. Think about how the world has been divided over the issues like Ukraine war and climate change and food security like that. So personally, I expect that such a polarization will continue for some time, and the similar situations will occur frequently when there are issues and disputes in the international the meetings beside the G20 summit.
Right. When talking about global issues, the world is in great need of a joint declaration again this year. But, there were times that declarations were just mere declarations, just being left as statements. Will this year's edition be something like that? Should we be concerned in any way?
Probably. I think that it is very likely that this year's declaration, as you mentioned, will be another empty pledge made by the member states. As I mentioned a moment ago, each member state has different opinions and the national interests in the major issues like the climate change and food security and the debt crisis of low-income countries. If you look at what has happened for the issue of climate change, for example, most countries are reluctant to implementing what they agreed in the G20 summit and other international meetings. It's mainly because they face a prisoner's dilemma situation where they lack of trust each other and prioritize their national interest over the international agreement. For instance, although the Biden administration, the world leader, claims that U.S. is fully committing itself to changing its economy into a green economy as soon as possible, but it is moving very slow, mainly because they have to consider the voices of the fossil fuel energy industry at home. right? The similar situations happen in other countries, and therefore it's not realistic to expect that the member states are willing to actively take their full responsibilities following what they agreed in the international meetings like at G20.
Right. Professor Min, also there is a no-show at this year's G20 summit. That is Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Now, there are many speculations and analysis as to why he didn't make it. What do you think the reason is?
Well, basically, I think that the President Xi has too many things to consider before coming to the G20 summit this year. As you know, China faces the various problems nowadays. First of all, it suffers from the serious domestic problems, like the real estate problems, lower economic growth problems, and the higher unemployment rates among the younger people. And China also has the external problems, like its border disputes with India, Japan's nuclear contaminated water release problem, and the territorial disputes over the South China Sea, and most importantly, its strategic competition with the United States. So it was reported that President Xi unexpectedly made the decision not to attend the G20 summit this year. So it seems that President Xi needed to have some time to save his face in the international community. If the presidency received further criticisms from the member states where the United States and India are dominating the voices of the meeting, it will put President Xi into more difficult political situations domestically. So I think President Xi made a decision to skip the G20 summit this time, and he will come back. It's very likely to the international stage sometime later this year, like the upcoming One Belt, One Road initiative meeting in October.
Right, he does have lots of other priorities to take care of, especially in terms of the domestic cases. Now, the rest of the leaders, except Russian leader Putin, have made it to the summit. What does it mean for other leaders who have actually made it to the summit then?
Well, first of all, as I mentioned earlier today, based on the support of the United States, India's mediating role and its position as a leader of the Global South will be highlighted through the G20 summit this time. And the absence of the President Xi and Putin will allow U.S. and other Western democratic countries to speak more loudly in the meeting. So it is expected that U.S. Will take advantage of this meeting as a useful opportunity to enhance its relations with the member states and try to spread out its national interests to its counterparts through the agendas of the meeting. So we need to see how much successful President Biden and the Western democratic countries would be in producing desirable outcomes following their own national interests and improving their relations with the member states, and mainly the developing countries, at the end of the meeting.
Right. It could actually be a great opportunity for U.S., where U.S. President Joe Biden can seize other opportunities amid Xi's absence. Now, can we then, in the meantime, expect a collective voice against North Korean threats?
Yes, I don't think that North Korean military threat is one of the main issues, but that issue will be utilized by the President Yoon and the President Biden in the meeting. And like what he did in the ASEAN summit in Indonesia, it is expected that President Yoon will urge Russia not to take any attempts to seek military cooperation with North Korea, and he will also try to confirm the support of the member states about South Korea's position that North Korea should stop developing illegal nuclear and missile capabilities and come back to the negotiating table. And considering that most of the member states have been supporting what South Korea has been pursuing against North Korea's military threats, it is likely that there will be another collective voice against North Korea's illegal nuclear and missile provocations and developments. So it is expected that the G20 summit this year will be another place where South Korea confirms international community support against North Korea's military threats.
Right, before I let you go, Professor Min, briefly, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is heading to Russia in the coming days, right? Now, with all the calling out on the regime at the ASEAN and G20 summit, Kim and Poon will probably likely go ahead with those arms deals, right?
Yes, I think so. And I'm not still it's not still certain, but by 100%. But it's very likely that they will have the summit sometime next week. And the arms deals, I think, is one of the main goals of the summit next week. So according to the media, it is likely that North Korea will provide Russia with the conventional weapons like ammunitions, cannons, and rockets. But it's not clear what North Korea will receive in return from Russia. North Korea may want to get cash, but it would not be easy for Russia to transfer money to North Korea because of the international sanctions. Meanwhile, North Korea may want to get some food, but the media showed that the Russia are lack of the food because of the war in the Ukraine. So some people expect that Russia will transfer advanced military technologies such as ICBM and SLBM capabilities to North Korea. Of course, the such technologies would be very helpful to North Korea, but think about from the Russian side. I'm not sure whether Russia thinks that such a transaction between conventional weapons and advanced military technology would be a good deal. I'm not sure about it. So, in other words, it could be too much for Russia to transfer the advanced technologies just for their conventional weapons. So we need to see what will actually happen between the two countries in the coming months. However, it seems to be obvious that they will improve their military cooperation for some time.
Right. All right, Professor Min, thanks as always for your insight. We appreciate it.
Thank you.